we should take some satisfaction that in many ways we've have a better situation on the social agenda than we do on the economic, but that we have a long way to go. We should also take great pride in the fact that we are on the journey. We have a process, we have a group, we have an effort, and we're building a plan, and hopefully everybody in this room can support that. Hopefully those of you in the room that like to be part of it can become part of it. And then we can change everything. We can change everything. This is ultimately about action. It's ultimately about creating a group that works hard on these issues at the national level. But, and let me just take a few more minutes before I wrap up, to talk about what's the role of business in all of this. Now, as I said a while ago, traditionally, when we thought about the social agenda, we thought about government first, and then NGOs. Those have been the traditional institutions that drive the social agenda in any country. And that's not just Paraguay, that's everywhere. That's historically the way it's been. Over the last 15 or 20 years, business has started to realize that it needs to be engaged in the social agenda as well. The first efforts were largely in philanthropy, giving. So businesses and their management and their owners gave money and have been giving money to social causes and supporting NGOs. And that activity has been growing, and I think it's a good thing. A good thing for business to be contributing and giving back some of its resources to improve the society, because the society ultimately is going to determine the ultimate potential of the business. It's very hard to have a business growing rapidly in a society that's failing, where people are not doing well. Okay? Now, about 15 years ago or so, many companies decided, well, philanthropy is good, but we need to go further. We need to go further. And that was really the beginning of what has come to be called corporate social responsibility, which is more than just giving. It's behaving ethically. It's following, and it's compliance with community standards, and that includes the law, but more than just the law. It's complying with the standards that the society would want a company to follow. It's being a good citizen and participating in the community and in making things better. And it's also been heavily focused on the notion of sustainability. That is, that you can't operate today in a way that will destroy the resources that you depend on. And most major businesses today have a corporate social responsibility program. And in some cases, a very large program. And this is good. This has been a big step forward, because the private sector needs to hold itself to higher standards than it has in the past. You know, we are at a moment today in history where business is viewed with quite a bit of suspicion because of some history of businesses exploiting and not contributing and not meeting ethical standards and not behaving in ways that would be consistent with the standards of the communities in which they operated. And I think we in business have listened and learned and are making rapid strides in addressing some of those problems. But what I'd like to stress today, to sort of conclude this discussion of development, is that today we're seeing an even bigger role for business in social progress. And that is what we call shared value. What we're finding is that actually dealing with the societal problems that I had on my earlier chart, water, nutrition, shelter, healthcare, education, dealing with those social problems is a fundamental business opportunity. And indeed, businesses are in the business of meeting needs. That's what capitalism is all about. Capitalism is about how to meet needs. How to meet needs and how to do it profitably. And what we're starting to understand is that capitalism just doesn't apply to traditional economic needs. Capitalism can also meet needs like nutrition and housing for lower income people and all kinds of things like that. But businesses haven't traditionally seen that as their role. They thought that their role is to serve the traditional customer with the traditional products, with the traditional features. And the companies haven't understood that some of their biggest growth opportunities are to meet these societal needs. And actually, that's where the need is in the world. And I can give you many examples. So the question is, how can we get businesses engaged in social issues not just as social responsibility, but as businesses? And of course, every business is going to have a different place to engage society. So let me give you an example. Here's a company that makes irrigation equipment. It's an Indian company. And it's drip irrigation, which is an irrigation technique that uses water very efficiently, which I don't think probably in Paraguay is very well known because you have so much water that you don't need to use it efficiently. But in India or in Africa, the water is a real problem. And this company has been able to work to build an $800 million business selling this technology to small farmers. And it served, as of a year ago, 4 million farmers. It allows the farmers to dramatically reduce the use of water. The biggest use of water in the world, the biggest misuse of water is actually by farmers. Mostly small farmers, because it's very wasteful use of water. And this company has actually had a tremendous impact on that problem, which is a societal problem. We have water problems all over the world, not in Paraguay. That's one of your assets. We got to build on that asset. We got to figure out how to turn that into value for our economy. But that's another question. And as they've helped these small farmers reduce the use of water, it's also improved the yields, the crop yields. And so what does that mean? That means these poor farmers are no longer poor. This isn't a government program. But it's had more impact on water and poverty than probably any other government program. Aside from sending everybody money, that program has impact. That's what the Brazilians do. They just send people money. That's great if you have it, But this program actually solves the underlying problem. How to create the potential for a better income. And look at who did it. business. And guess what? They made a profit. And guess what? The fact that they made a profit means that they can grow and grow and grow and grow and grow. See, the problem with government programs and NGOs is not that they're bad. It's just that they consume resources. To serve more people, you have to have more money. But if you can get a business solution to one of these problems, it doesn't consume resources, it generates resources and jobs while benefiting the social needs that you're benefiting. And we're seeing lots of examples like this. You know, here's a Brazilian forest products company, a pulp and paper manufacturer called Fibria. I had a thrill yesterday. I sat next to the chairman of this company and former CEO on a stage like this. I discovered this company. I never met them before. I met this man yesterday. This company has done probably more than any other organization to reduce deforestation, because they've understood how to cultivate a special kind of tree, eucalyptus trees, which you've all heard of, which turn out to be much more efficient in generating paper per hectare of land than the conventional trees and the conventional forests that people are cutting down. And it turns out to be quite stupid to cut down the old forest. That's not very efficient. The efficient solution is to cultivate these trees. But they don't only use their plantations to cultivate these trees, which, by the way, the plantations are mixed together with ecosystem that is undisturbed. Because what they found is if you have the plantation next to an undisturbed ecosystem, it works better, it's more efficient than if you just cut everything down. And they've also gone to all the little landholders anywhere near their operations, and they said, look, why don't you plant a few eucalyptus trees on your land, and we'll buy that. We'll buy that wood. We'll buy that pulp. And you can see on the slide about 30% of all the raw material that they use in their huge mills. They're the largest producer of pulp in the world. 30% of all the material that they use in their plants comes from little landholders, who all of a sudden have a bit of a higher income now because they have a crop that they didn't know they could grow, but this company has helped them do that. This is business creating shared value. This is good for the business. It makes them more efficient. It's helped them grow. But it's good for the society. It's addressing a series of societal needs. This is what happens when the private sector thinks differently about its opportunity. And I think in this country, at this moment, there are huge opportunities for the private sector to deal with all the social problems that I described on my earlier chart. And the reason I know that is because I work a lot in Colombia and I work a lot in Peru, and I'm seeing that happen. I'm seeing it happen. I'm seeing the private sector step up and engage not just as good citizens, not just as generous givers, but using the business itself as an instrument to drive social progress in a way that actually is self-sustaining because it's profitable. And the profit is good. Well, we're at the end of our time. Let me just show you my heroes. There they are. This is the group of your fellow citizens and organizations here that have come together and made a commitment for the long term to take this measurement tool, which will be renewed and improved every year, and study it and set priorities and engage in planning and activism to cause change. It's this set of organizations and those people, some of whom you may be able to recognize. It's those organizations and those people is why I'm here today. Very impressive. So let's build on this. This country is going to be whatever you make it. Let's make it into a leader in social progress. Let's make it into a thriving economy because we understand the fundamentals of competitiveness and are acting on them. And let's make it into a country where the business community, like nowhere else in Latin America, steps up. And I can tell you that, that's my hope, that's my dream. But I think we have the opportunity. I think we have the opportunity. So that concludes my remarks. I felt we had a precious opportunity today to get all of us sort of on the same page on these fundamental topics. I hope you haven't felt like you're back in school, hearing your professor give a boring lecture. But so much of progress in society is about ideas. It's about understanding things the right way, in a common way. And again, I want to thank you all for your warmth, tremendous warmth for the first moment I arrived, for the pioneering work that some of you have already been doing, for the wonderful reception I had with the president and his team earlier today, and with, I think, the enthusiasm that I'm feeling about the opportunity we have. So let's open it up for questions in the time we have remaining, but thank you very, very much for your warm, warm welcome. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Professor Porter. Before we start the questions, quería decirles a todos ustedes que van a recibir unas planillas de evaluación y desde ya les agradecemos a todos su colaboración y nada, las dejan y al final del evento los miembros del staff de la organización las van a recoger. Bueno, nos sentamos. Professor Porter, please join us. Para este espacio de preguntas recibimos también con el aplauso de ustedes al director ejecutivo de Fundación Moisés Bertoni y también miembro del grupo impulsor del Índice de Progreso Social, señor Jan Esperanza. También quiero presentarles al señor Roberto Artavia, él es presidente de Viva Trust y de la Fundación Latinoamericana Posible. Gracias por acompañarnos en este espacio de preguntas. Bueno, we have so many questions.
Yes. Good.
It's incredible.
Good.
Estaba comentando al profesor Porter que es impresionante la cantidad de preguntas del público y entonces lo que vamos a hacer es, en primer lugar, el señor Esperanza iniciará las consultas, luego el señor Roberto y luego entrará una pregunta más que vaya llegando a medida que vamos abriendo este espacio de preguntas. Adelante.
Well, since you don't have the translator, I will do it in English so the people can.
Okay.
The people have the translator. Well, there are right and wrong social strategies. Some can affect economic development and competitiveness. And some also can affect, or some economic development strategies can affect social progress. So can you give us some examples about those rights and wrongs, social strategies and economic strategies?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that, let me just start with a few examples of some wrong social strategies. I think in the effort to be generous and in the effort to care, we have many governments, basically giving money and, providing subsidies. So, for example, a lot of countries, the gasoline is subsidized, or people are provided with income independently of just with no strings attached, and I think those policies often actually create more problems than solutions because they stand in the way of creating efficiency and productivity in the economy. So, for example, if you're providing a lot of subsidies for goods and services, it becomes very difficult for the private sector to be profitable and to invest and to be efficient, and so you end up with state-owned companies who are not efficient. And when you're providing people with just an income without any expectations, then those people often just live off that income, and nothing changes, and they don't get better. What we want to do with social policy is we want to create a situation where people can improve their circumstances, and we want to provide resources to people, but we want to provide resources in a way that encourages them to invest in themselves, to invest in their community, to invest in their children, it's a slippery thing sometimes. There are many societies where people mean very well with social policies, but unfortunately they don't pursue them in a way that creates the motivation and the incentive and the investments necessary. I think basically you want people to be able to invest in themselves, improve their capabilities. That's why education is so important. That's why training is so fundamental. That's why giving people the capacity to have adequate housing, giving them incentives and support to be healthy, all those things are very pro-economic development. But things that don't deal with the fundamentals of people's circumstances and create incentives for people not to invest and not to engage in themselves and not to make the effort to be productive members of society, those things work in the wrong direction.
Thank you very much. Señor Artavia.
Yeah, I would like to follow up, Michael, because you mentioned the role of education, and we got several questions dealing with the universities.
Yep.
For example, I have two here. One is, what might be the role of universities other than simply educating people in fostering competitiveness, and how can universities use the Social Progress Index to change their programs?
Mm-hmm. Well, universities are very fundamental institutions for creating a prosperous economy, because really, what we know now is that training at the high school level is kind of a minimum these days for really being able to create a competitive workforce. For example, in America, if all you have is a high school degree, your unemployment rate is 2 or 3 times higher than if you have even 2 years of technical training or college training. And basically, to do productive work with modern technology, we need people that are relatively skilled. And so the education beyond the high school it becomes important. Now, there's a big debate going on right now that too much of our education policy has been focused on university and not enough on technical and vocational training, and I think that's a very important point. I think that just getting a college degree doesn't necessarily prepare you for work, and I think for many people will do better if they pursue the right kind of technical training. So I think this country in particular, given your stage, I don't think the aspiration should be for everybody to go to college. I think the aspiration should be for some people to go to college, but other people to get themselves equipped with real skill in whatever field they're interested in. But universities ultimately are the place where you train management, where you train the engineering and technical people that are required to operate in the modern economy, where you train your physicians and your lawyers and the people that are necessary for the right institutions in society, the right kind of sophistication in terms of the economy and the way it works. So universities are very fundamental. Universities, I think, historically have been very much about knowledge, but I think that the Social Progress Index I think opens up a rich opportunity for universities to orient their programs and their training around fields in which the society is lacking. And for example, right now the education school at Harvard, used to be kind of, nobody ever remembered that we had an education school. But now, education is one of the central issues facing America and our success. And the education school is now deeply engaged in that fundamental issue facing our society and playing a very important leadership role in new thinking and new ways of managing schools and educating students and providing new kinds of educational technology. So I think universities have a role in every single one of these areas, providing the knowledge, providing the solutions, providing people that are trained to lead and deliver services in that area. And so I think, business schools are great. I love business schools, but the university actually has the capacity to make contribution in all of the aspects of the social agenda.
I wanted to ask you, there are so many examples of leaders that they don't have a degree, like Steve Jobs. Are these good examples?
Yeah.
And on the other hand, in Paraguay, most of the people who are into technological business, they don't learn what they have to use in the market. So what's the gap between what you learn in the school and what you need to do at work?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that there are a small number of very well-known examples of people that have been tremendous entrepreneurs and business successes that haven't, completed their college, but Bill Gates and people like that. But I think it's important to know that Bill Gates got into Harvard. I mean, he got in. That's because he was a phenomenal student in high school. He was very smart and very able. And it turns out in the area of IT and technology, there's a part of that world where people, it's something that you kind of have a passion for, and you don't need the formal mathematics and so forth. You just develop a gift for understanding IT. So IT is a place where you see these child prodigies who somehow get it. I don't know how to. I mean, I can't tell a computer from a toaster in terms of how to actually work it, but there's a group of people that just get that. So, but I wouldn't say that that's the general story. If you look at the CEOs of the 1,000 leading companies in America, I think probably 3 are going to not have a degree from a serious university, and many of them are going to now have graduate degrees and PhDs. And I think more likely to build a technology company today, if you're not in the Facebook space, but if you're in the making real serious high-tech product space, you almost need advanced degree more than even just a college degree. So I think that the knowledge that is that's necessary to understand the state of the art in management or in technology is growing, not shrinking. And so I think universities are going to continue to play a very fundamental role in the training of leaders in science and technology and medicine and a variety of other fields. That said, there ought to be room for people to follow different tracks, and there's a lot of I know a lot of smaller business owners that that never finished college or never even went to college, and they just have a good sense for an important product and how to meet a need, and they've learned what they need to know to run a great company. So there's not one size fits all here. We ought to have opportunities for all kinds of people to pursue whatever kind of training equips them to do what they're passionate to do. But I think that we need to keep improving the quality of the universities in this country. We don't have enough universities yet in this country that actually have the stature and from a global or context that we're going to need if we're going to achieve our aspirations in the economy. So let's keep investing in the universities. Let's make sure the universities engage in the society, in business, in social issues, and let's view them as critical assets for economic development.
Mr. Potter, do you think there is like a new and growing global concern about social issues,
Yep.
especially inside companies, big companies? Because, for instance, in Paraguay, we used to say that we have a very, very good competitive sector, like, for instance, beef, soybean, but they work in rural areas where still 50% of the population live under the line of poverty.
Right.
And we produce food for almost 60 million people, while 1 million people still live in Paraguay undernourished. So
Yeah.
what do you think about it?
Yeah, well, I think we're seeing that in lots of different industries. I do a lot of work now on shared value with businesses around the world. I was recently in Colombia, and they have two large oil companies in Colombia. One is called Ecopetrol, which you probably all have heard of, and the other one is called Pacific Rubiales, and it was some Venezuelan guys who left Venezuela. And it turns out that Colombia has deposits of oil that are very gooey and sticky. It's the so-called heavy oil. But it wasn't exploited at all because it's complicated. It's hard to do. Well, it turns out Venezuela has a lot of that. And when Venezuela, took the path it took, a lot of the people that used to be working in the oil industry in Venezuela left. And these guys from Venezuela came to Colombia and they built this company, Pacific Rubiales. But the oil deposits are in the middle of nowhere. Zero. There's just nothing. And so what they've come to understand is in order to be a world-class oil company, they have to create basically all the infrastructure of society in the communities in which they're working. And I think we're increasingly finding that companies can't just think it's somebody else's job to take these issues on, but companies are increasingly having to understand how to do that. And that's engaging companies much more in the societal issues. And it starts with training, of course, for the workforce, because, companies need good, well-trained people, and if they're not available, they have to do it, and companies, it continues with suppliers. Often you want to have efficient suppliers who can work with you and provide services and provide goods that you need for your business, but if you don't have those suppliers, companies are finding, well, we've got to take responsibility. We have to develop those suppliers. And we need to make sure that our employees have good health care, and so we have to take responsibility for stimulating the improvement of the healthcare system, and it goes on and on and on. And I think the redefinition of the role of business in the community is happening very, very rapidly, and particularly in remote areas and rural areas, which we're going to see a lot of that opportunity here in Paraguay. The companies that learn to do this are going to be the big success stories, and we see more and more examples like that. So you're absolutely right, but I would say even in the urban areas, there are major opportunities for the corporate sector, depending on their business, to start playing a role in addressing these social problems. For example, in Peru, there's a company that has done a marvelous job in really figuring out how to build very, very low cost but decent quality housing for lower income people. There's another example like that in Mexico as well. And these are giant growth companies. Why? Because they're meeting a huge need. And in some cases, the customer pays for the home themselves. In some cases, it's partly paid for by government, but there's a tremendous social need. There's a big economic opportunity behind it. But that requires a different kind of insight, a different kind of perception of what's going on in the society, a willingness to actually move outside of the conventional definition of the market and the product and move into new spaces. And that's starting to happen very, very rapidly all over the world.
Mike, we got several questions that deal with cluster development. Some of them mention endowments, the fact that we have soil, the fact that we have energy, the fact that we have plenty of water. And we also mention other sectors with potential, tourism, energy itself, agribusiness. So the question is, how do you go from industry development to cluster development?
Well, that's a great question, and I think what we often see is that, to some extent, clusters often form naturally. So there's many stories like that around the world. You know, think of Wall Street in New York, which is a cluster in financial services. If you go back, 100 years, then there wasn't much there, but then there started to be a kind of a market for people would get together and trade securities, and then one thing some firms were created, to be in the banking business, and then once there were banks, then other firms were formed. The law firms came, and the IT suppliers, and the cluster can sometimes kind of form naturally and spontaneously over time. What we find today, though, is that that process, can be substantially improved if one has this view, first of all, that development is driven by clusters. But generally, the first thing you want to do with clusters is you want to understand those areas where there's some existing activity which gives you a clear sign that there's economic potential. So you start with what you're already doing, and that's why I mentioned those particular examples for Paraguay. We're already in the beef business. We're already in the soybean business. We're already generating clean energy. We're already doing certain kinds of water transportation. So you look for what you're already doing, and then the question is, then you start to say, okay, now let's no longer look at it from the company point of view. Let's step back and start to look at it from the cluster point of view. So in the beef industry, you've got a rancher who's growing cattle, okay? Well, then you start asking yourself, well, what are the critical inputs that we need? And it's going to be food, and it's going to be fences, and it's going to be all kinds of things that you need to grow beef efficiently. And then you need to organize. So you first of all, you look at what you already have, where there's some strength. You start to understand that broadly. What are the things that have to be put together to allow that to be more efficient? And then let's organize ourselves. Let's get all the producers together. Let's create an association of all the beef producers. That may already exist here. It probably does. And then let's get together and think about, okay, what are the things we all need? Well, we need the better logistics, or we need this kind of supplier, or we need a better veterinary medicine capability. So let's figure out what we all need, and then let's work together to see if we can stimulate the development of the things we need. And let's work with government and get government support. And let's recruit some new companies from outside the country to come join us and work here and bring their expertise to the Paraguayan cluster. That's the process. And it's sort of a process of public-private collaboration. It's not about a lot of money. It's being organized. It's being focused. It's collaborating well, setting up joint training programs. If everybody's training the workers they're hiring, well, let's train them together, and that makes it more efficient. And then we'll compete to hire them. Who's the one who gets to hire them? That's what cluster development is all about. It's there's quite a bit known about it now, and this is a topic where I will be kind of continuing to discuss this with business and government leaders here over the coming period.
And what happens when these clusters get too powerful? I mean, what about government control? There was a question asking about the late crisis in the USA. What about the government control?
About which prices? I'm sorry?
I mean, you talk about Wall Street, for example.
Yeah.
So they get too powerful, and then they can put in jeopardy all the economy of a country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, again, one of the critical things about any cluster and the economy as a whole is you've got to ensure that you have open and free competition. So that's why every country needs competition laws to ensure that there's fair competition, there's not a monopoly, that there's an ability of new companies to come into the market. Some of the abuses of companies getting too strong and too powerful comes from lack of competition and lack of openness to trade and so forth. The other thing comes from not having the right regulatory environment. And so I think the problem in our financial services industry in Wall Street was in some areas of financial services, we really lacked sound regulations that created transparency and that kind of required people to put capital at risk so that they would be personally responsible for making sure the products were good. And so good competition requires, first of all, open competition, but it also requires the right kind of playing field, and that's set by regulation. So I think that I would not fear clusters getting powerful as long as there's lots of competitors and as long as there's a sound regulatory environment. And in general, even though we had a disaster on Wall Street, in certain segments of the business, I think what's coming out of that is going to be an even stronger and more competitive Wall Street because the bar has been raised. And I think, it's a great question, and there's a lot of concerns about one cluster in an economy getting too big and the economy being too dependent on that. But I think your best defense against that problem is just make sure competition is always open and nobody can distort it and nobody can get protection and then make sure that you have the world-class regulation. And in every area of the economy today, we know what world-class regulation looks like, and Paraguay needs to be leading in improving its regulatory policies, not just letting that wait until later.
We only got time for one final question, and I'm sorry because we got many wonderful questions that we would have liked to ask, but I chose this one because I think it's a fit way to end. It mentions nationalism, patriotism, and love of country as the setting, and fundamentally asks, or they ask, because it was more than one, what can we do as citizens to participate in the effort to make our country more competitive and more sustainable in social terms?
Yep. Well, first of all, I think that this pride in country and patriotism and high hopes and aspirations for your country is a precious asset. And I think we need to cultivate that asset every way we can in Paraguay. That is the first point. What that gives you is an environment that's conducive for working together. What you want is a society where people view the society as bigger than themselves. That where you're a participant in something bigger, and that you have that love of your society and your community that will allow you to compromise and will allow you to work collaboratively in a pragmatic way to make things better. rather than see your little group, whatever it is, as the one who deserves more or the one who should take advantage of the situation. And so I think that feeling that is that question suggests is a very precious asset to a society. The one word that you